We have created a series of very short videos to summarize a book entitled Learning the Brainstem. The voice you hear is AI generated. LTB10 situates us at the level of the facial colliculi and pons. I will remind you that we orient the brainstem as we would see it in an MRI of the brainstem. The facial colliculi are conspicuous landmarks at the floor of the fourth ventricle. To help you a bit, think about a person in the fourth ventricle, with each foot on each facial colliculus. These elevations in the floor of the fourth ventricle are not the result of the facial nerve nucleus. The facial colliculus is the location both of the abducens or CN6 nucleus and infranuclear fibers of CN7 that loop around the CN6 nucleus. Why the loop, also known as the genu or knee of the facial nerve, happens at all relates to embryology. In development, branchiomotor cells that are destined to become the facial nucleus migrate away from the fourth ventricle in a caudal direction, yet their axons remain close to the ventricle. The axons, which are infranuclear fascicles of CN7, then pass laterally and will exit the brainstem ventrolaterally. Depending on what axial section of pons that you examine, internal anatomy will look different, maybe in subtle ways, but different all the same. Image A is higher or more rostral than image B, wherein our figure still stands. Image C is slightly lower than image B. Lowest or most caudal among these sections is image D, with an MR image at roughly the same axial level as image D. Image E is the MR image. Note something, however. The facial colliculi are indeed conspicuous, but there are other bundles, as older anatomists called them, at the floor of the fourth ventricle, not only at the level of the pons, but also lower in the fourth ventricle. In Figure A, our upside-down person stands on so-called median eminences, which contain fibers of the median longitudinal fasciculus, or MLF. In images D and E, the cavity of the fourth ventricle contains a portion of midline cerebellum called the nodulus. There is no room for our upside-down person to stand. I want to draw your attention to something by magnifying the right hemipons. Within the green rectangle is a descending tract associated with a nucleus, and we have encountered the complex previously. The descending tract and nucleus of CN5, indicated by the white circle, can be visualized from pons into medulla and beyond, into the cervical spinal cord. For extra credit, there is also a nucleus, circled in grey, that abuts the cavity of the fourth ventricle. It is the medial portion of an extensive vestibular nuclear complex. Both the descending trigeminal nucleus and the medial vestibular nucleus are sensory nuclei. By comparison, within the red rectangle, which is medial to the green rectangle we just saw, is a large motor nucleus, the facial or CN7 nucleus. And if we elongate the red rectangle towards the fourth ventricle, we encounter a different motor nucleus, that of CN6 or the abducens nucleus, which we indicate with a blue arrow. In these two images of pons, the black arrows point at the median sulcus, precisely in the midline. Lateral to the median eminences, or lateral to the facial colliculi respectively, the orange arrows point to the so-called sulcus limitans. For our purposes, the sulcus limitans is helpful because nuclei medial to it are motor, and nuclei that are lateral to it are sensory. More technically, the sulcus limitans divides alar from basal plates. To re-emphasize the point, division by the sulcus limitans between lateral dorsal versus medial ventral domains helps to distinguish sensory from motor nuclei in the pontine tegmentum and in medulla. Returning to our upside-down person in the fourth ventricle, what is above his head? In other words, what nuclear structures are present in white matter that is most dorsal in the slide? I'll place blue, white, and red dots on the deep cerebellar nuclei in the right brainstem. Anatomists often refer to four such deep nuclei, the fastigial, globose, emboliform, and dentate nuclei, from medial to lateral. I will stick with three: the fastigial nucleus, medial in blue, the convoluted dentate nucleus, lateral in red, and the interposed nucleus, in white. My reason for citing just three nuclei is to point out three relationships to cerebellar anatomy. The fastigial nucleus receives projections from the most midline cerebellum, called the vermis, and from the midline nodulus. The interposed nucleus receives projections from paravermis, and the dentate nucleus receives projections from cerebellar hemispheres lateral to the paravermis. Vermis, paravermis, and cerebellar hemispheres on the right will project to their respective deep cerebellar nuclei, also on the right. In other words, the cerebellum can be understood, in functional terms, as having a longitudinal organization from top to bottom of cerebellum, not one based on the transverse cerebellifolia that pass from side to side. Returning to our upside-down person in the fourth ventricle, what may be said to be underfoot, from the floor of the fourth ventricle to the ventral surface of pons. In LTB 11, we will move from dorsal to ventral, passing at this axial level through the pontine tegmentum and basis pontis. Stay tuned for part 2. And as always, thanks for watching.